Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. 250 million Americans live in or around urban areas. That means more than 3/4 of the U.S. population shares just 3% of the land. All these people living in cities. Where does the food come from? It comes from farms, but where are those farms located? Many of those farms are located in California's Central Valley. The Central Valley produces 1/3 of all the produce grown in the United States. But what if a majority of the vegetable production didn't take place in places like the Central Valley and on mega farms? What if it took place right where we live, in the cities that surround us? Urban and suburban areas are filled with empty spaces. We can let those spaces be assets or liabilities. The solution is in our hands. The resources lie all around us. And that's what this show is about, being an active, positive part of the solution. This is the story of one farmer, an urban farmer who's being part of the change. This is the story of Curtis Stone. Curtis is an urban farmer who farms 15,000 square feet in Canada. He's been farming for 5 years. What he does is profitable. What he does fills a need within his community. What he does is be part of the solution. We're going to follow Curtis on a journey through a full farm season, taking you behind the scenes to see what being an urban farmer is really like. It isn't always glorious, but it's real. Stay tuned and enjoy the journey. Welcome to the Urban Farmer, Week 4. I'm your host, Diego. It's now April 8th, and we're another week into the urban farming season with Curtis Stone. What's happened on the farm so far? At this point in the season, Curtis has prepared most of his growing beds on his various plots for the upcoming farm season, and that includes switching a lot of his production methods over to more of a no-till style. He's been spending a few hours each day on farm-related activities, and the season is just getting underway. But this year, he isn't just doing it alone. He's doing it with the help of a new full-time employee, a move that Curtis hopes will allow him to work more on the business, not in the business.
So I want to train a person who can take over some major responsibilities on the farm so that instead of myself as the business owner getting trapped in this endless cycle of working in my business, I can have somebody else working in the business, and I can step back and work on the business and work on expanding the farm, because I do have a 5-year plan.
This week, we'll be talking about Curtis's new employee and how the onboarding and training process is going. We'll also talk about the financial impacts of hiring someone. When do the additional costs make sense? On small farms like Curtis's, these types of decisions aren't always easy to make. At times, cash flow can be tight, especially when production is seasonal. For Curtis, this is the slow point in his season. But it isn't just all work and no pay. Curtis is actually selling some products now, and the sales season is just beginning. He's actively selling some of his overwinter crops to his restaurant customers and at farmers markets. And that brings us to another topic of today's show, selling products. When you sell products, you first have to start by pricing those products. How do you do that? Do you price off of competitors? Do you price off your costs? Do you price off the grocery stores? Or some combination of the above? When you start to think about it, it isn't as easy as it sounds, and it can force you into analysis paralysis if you aren't careful. In this episode, we'll be talking a lot about pricing and how Curtis prices his products. He's found a pricing system that works for him and his customers, and he's kept his prices consistent since he started farming a few years ago.
My prices have stayed the same or gone down because my costs are low. All my costs are labor. My input costs are negligible.
Curtis's pricing system works. It's mutually beneficial for both himself and his customers. He's been able to keep his prices consistent for his customers and grow the business in the process. Prices themselves aren't the whole story. There's a lot more to sales than the number after the dollar sign on the products. There's a story behind that product in a relationship with those customers who are looking to buy the product. As a local organic farmer who farms in the community that his customers live in, Curtis has an advantage. He's a part of that community and he fills a need within that community. His customers, his neighbors, they get it.
I just don't play that game because I know I bring more value to the table, and I don't think the types of customers that are really buying my stuff are really all that concerned. If my stuff is 25 cents more or 50 cents more than the next guy. The key is if you're selling all your stuff, then you know your prices are right.
The sales season has officially begun, and Curtis's first farmers market of the season was last Saturday. Let's see how that went.
It's always awesome to go back and see all the people that, have been your steady customers for so long. And it's pretty cool, man. I mean, you just have people telling you how much they missed seeing you and having your stuff. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Have such a grateful group of people that come and support you. So it's fun. Doing the market's a blast. So it's like a party basically, and just talking to cool people and having good conversations. And it's great.
When it comes to the first market of the year, how do you set prices? Do you basically price off of last year and then maybe adjust if the season goes on? Or how do you determine that?
My prices are always the same. They never change. I find one thing that is with prices, and we discussed this in our online course quite extensively, but the key is if you understand your value as a person as well as a farmer, like I understand that my value when I'm at that farmer's market goes far above and beyond just being a person that's selling produce. I bring a lot of other value to the table. People ask me questions about gardening nonstop, about farming, how to prepare the food. Like there's a lot more intrinsic value in what I bring. And I find when you're really confident and you fully embody and understand that, prices are irrelevant. I might be one of few farmers at the market that would say that. I'm not sure what other farmers say. This is something that I've come to on my own, but I don't play the price game. I mean, I see farmers walking around with clipboards in the morning, writing each other's prices down and then going and slashing their prices. I just don't play that game because I know I bring more value to the table, and I don't think the types of customers that are really buying my stuff are really all that concerned. If my stuff is 25 cents more or 50 cents more than the next guy.
So have your prices changed at all in the 5 years you've been farming?
No, they've been the same. Haven't changed at all. As far as restaurants go, they've actually gone down because in an inflationary world, that's pretty unheard of. Most people's prices continuously go up. And that's been what's been kind of cool for me actually that I've seen on the wholesale end is that a lot of the big distributors' prices have continuously gone up, and my prices have stayed the same or gone down because my costs are low. All my costs are labor. My input costs are negligible. My fuel costs are negligible. Everything is just labor, and every year I get better at farming, and I find faster and more efficient and effective ways to do things. So that allows me to pass off those savings to the consumer.
That's interesting. I would have thought that there would have been gradual price creep just from food prices in general.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that I think there will be, but I think this is where the huge potential advantage for local and urban farmers will be going forward, is that with small-scale agriculture, there doesn't need to be massive fluctuations in prices because the overhead for inputs is very small. So this, in time, will make local farms very competitive in the open market as to even the big, San Joaquin Valley, California farms that are sending produce up here for next to nothing. But, as the water is inevitably going to have to get more expensive, prices here will stabilize compared to what's coming from down there.
That's a good point, because I guess on a really small operation where you now have an employee, but you're for a long time were the only employee, you're not really exposed to inflationary factors. You're not paying interest rate on equipment. You're not buying input costs in like fertilizers. So it's just you. The land is what it is. So your prices for your costs aren't inflating over time. So you don't have to pass on any inflationary costs through the products that you're selling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, having said that, if food prices were to go up everywhere 100%, I would happily raise my prices 80%. You know, that would only make sense. I mean, I think farmers should be getting paid more anyways. But no, I think it's good. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity with all that for small scale local farmers.
So if you go back to when you started out, how did you determine a few things when it came time to selling? One, how did you determine the unit size of the product that you're selling? And then two, how did you price those units?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, I get into in my workshops and in our online course and my book and all that stuff. But basically, to sum it up, um, the best way to find that stuff out is to do extensive in the field market research yourself. So, there's some resources you can go to, but really the best way to do it is to just go to the farmer's market, shop at the farmer's market and see what other farmers are charging, look at the bunch size, ask, if you're a customer, just ask how much is in the bunch size, the bag and whatnot, and just see what other people are selling. That's number one. The other thing you can do is, when you're at the grocery store, and I still do this today just because I'm so, my dad is a real prices guy. He always looks at prices because that's how my dad measures inflation by looking at prices in the grocery store, not looking at the interest rates in the bank. And I always think that's interesting, I kind of have learned that from him in a way. And so whenever I'm in a grocery store, I always kind of meander through the produce section just a little bit and look at prices, even though I rarely buy anything in the produce section except maybe some lemons and bananas or something, from time to time. But, I always look at prices and I look at how things are bunched, and more today, I am more delighted to see how much prices have gone up in grocery stores. It's actually startling to me. I was in a organic grocery store last week, similar to Whole Foods or, Sprouts Market like you guys have down in California. And, I was looking at bunches of turnips that were literally half the size of the bunches that I sell, and they were for $3.98. I sell mine for $3 and they're twice the size. Same thing with the radishes. Looking at their beet bunches, like $4.80 for a bunch of beets. Like, the prices are unbelievable. I haven't had to change my prices, so I get pretty excited about that, actually, because sooner or later people are just going to be guided by their pocketbook. And I think, I believe in prices. I believe that, people like to talk a lot about their moral principles that guide them. But I think really when it comes down to it, most people are guided by their pocketbook. And so the more I see these rising prices, the more opportunities I see for new, small scale farmers.
Did you ever feel pressured to try and compete on price against other farmers? I know you probably don't now, but when you started out, did you feel like you had to price against them?
Yeah, a little bit. But the thing that really worked to my advantage early in the game is that, and this was not my intention, this kind of happened accidentally, but I branded my farm in such a unique way. My story was so unique that people wanted my stuff because, they were interested in the product, but they liked the story of the farm. And that was the main thing that drew them in. So I kind of have been fortunate to be able to avoid that. But again, that was my own work. That was the fact that I created a farm that was so intriguing to people that they weren't really so concerned about the price. To be honest, I barely paid any attention to it. When I was first starting, I did quite a bit of looking around, like I would go on the certified organic bulk price lists. Like they have, in BC, it's called COA BC, certified organic growers of BC or something like that. And they have a wholesale or case lot price list. And so all the COA BC farmers use that to just kind of get a general pricing. And I would reference that from time to time when I first started, probably just for the first year. But after that, I never looked at it again. But yeah, I mean, it was something I was concerned with a lot at the beginning, but as time went on, less and less.
Does your cost play into this at all, or do you just know that your cost per unit is so low it doesn't really matter? Like, are you trying to say on turnips, I know I have 50-cent cost into it. If I sell it at $3, I'm good, so you don't have to worry?
So the only cost thing that has changed, the only cost that has changed for me over the years is the price of seed. And as the price of seed has gone up, like let's just say, for example, the price of seed has gone up 15% since I started, which I think is a slight exaggeration, but just say, for example, my efficiency has improved by well over 100% since I started. So when I really look at it, it hasn't changed anything. I mean, my other input costs are, like, besides labor, my input costs are soil amendments. Like, compost is my most expensive cost for soil amendments, but I use like an organic fertilizer too. But it's small. Like, my cost to plant a bed of radishes is about $4. Like, to plant a 25-foot bed of radishes with inputs and seed is about $4. And I might spend $5 in labor to prepare that bed, plant it and all that. There's no cost in weeding, because I don't have to weed a lot of the crops that I do, because I primarily do stale seed bedding, which we've talked about in the previous show. So on a bed that will produce $250 a crop, there might be, let's say there's $15 of labor in there. To harvest, maybe you've got another $20 of labor. So all in all, it's still sitting pretty good at, $200 a bed of net cost. I mean, and there's other costs in there too. If you really break it down, okay, I take that product to the farmer's market, or I deliver that product to a restaurant. It's kind of hard to track a lot of these costs, but basic input costs are pretty low.
So I guess given the nature of the way you farm, input costs are inherently low. Where I was coming at with that question is, I'm just thinking, for anybody who's new farming, you want to make sure that you're at least charging a rate per unit that covers your cost into it. But this is so far away from a commodity system that you're probably going to have big margins no matter what you're doing.
I won't say you'll have big margins when you start, but the thing is, like, you can't charge more when you're starting out. And then lower, like, you can charge what's fair, but if you're not making money at that price, you can't just raise your prices above, to wherever. Ultimately, prices will only be realistic to what the average person is going to pay for them, or what a certain group of people that might be your largest demographic of your customer demographic is going to pay for them. So, that's the thing, that if, your input costs are too high and your prices aren't working out, you can't just raise your price. So you usually you have to change something with your system. You have to cut some costs in there in order to get your prices to reality. Because I personally, I make more money on my farm when my prices are lower. And this is nothing new to any economist or, business person, really. There are niche markets to some degree, but I think my farm does as well as it does because my prices are reasonable, because I can keep my input costs low. Some farmers I know, like I go and visit I visit farms all over the US and Canada, and I've been to some places, say Vancouver, for example, where the cost of living is extremely high. And I look at some of the prices of these farmers and I'm like, this is nuts. Like I see prices that are literally double what I charge. Like I see bunches of carrots for $5 at some of these farmers markets. I see salad greens for $16 a pound. Like they're literally double my prices. So, is that reflective of their costs and their input costs and their cost of living? Perhaps it might be. And so in those cases, then maybe it's realistic to charge those prices. Frankly, I don't see how anybody could charge those prices and not be going home with half of their stuff. I mean, the key is if you're selling all your stuff, then your prices are right. Then, the price is basically set to whatever the market will bear. And I think that's all fair in the world of buying and selling.
Most of your product you sell is a unit versus by weight. Can you clarify what that is for people? Because I think we've talked about that a few times and people might not know what that is.
So a unit is just like a unit of measure. So it's it's a bag. It's like, say, a quarter-pound bag of salad mix or a half-pound bag of salad mix, or it's a half-pound bunch of radishes or turnips or a three-quarter-pound bunch of beets or whatever it could be. When I'm selling at farmers markets, everything is sold in a unit, opposed to having loose product and selling it that way. And I know some people are going to say, oh, well, aren't you using plastic and isn't there waste in that? And yes, there is, frankly. And that is not, I'm not happy about that, but I've tried the alternative. When I first started farming, I did everything with plastic-free stuff, and nobody bought any. I barely sold any. And then I tried selling loose product, and I barely sold anything. Yeah, so most of my customers would consider themselves environmentalists, and so do I. But it's just the reality of the world we live in. People are used to certain standards, and I understand that we need to change those standards, but it's difficult when you're just trying to make a living, right? So you make compromises where you have to, and you do the best you can, really.
You've said this in workshops, and it makes total sense that if you're just selling prepackaged stuff, you don't have to deal with somebody coming up who buys 50 cents worth of lettuce and the next person buys $9 worth of lettuce. They just grab a bag and go. You don't have to worry about people handling the product, trying to bag it up on the spot, weighing it, dealing with all that stuff. So I see how it can simplify a ton of things at the end of the day. And it also just allows people to mix and match. And it probably makes people feel like pricing is simpler versus if you're trying to sell salad greens at $8 a pound and carrots at $3 a pound. And
oh yeah, it's no question about it that it makes it simpler. I mean, I've had a sort of the same pricing scheme since I've started, and still today people say, "Oh, I love the way your prices work. It's so simple. It's so easy," because it is. It's not. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be complicated for some items that don't really necessarily work with forming units. Like you've got things like large size heirloom tomatoes. You can't just like put those into a common size unit. Some things have to be sold by the pound because that's just the nature of the product. But any type of product that's divisible, whether it's greens or bunches or carrots or things like this, then you can put it into a unit, and it does simplify the transaction times and makes your life easier. Because if I have to stand there, and make change for somebody buying a $1.75 item, then another $2.50 item or whatever it is, it takes me more time, it takes more labor, and it actually, one thing I've noticed with this over the years is that it takes away my focus from delivering the most amount of value to that person. Because when I'm at a farmer's market, I'm 100% present. When people are coming to buy stuff with me, I'm engaging them and answering all their questions and talking to them, just being friendly. And the less I have to think about all those other things, the more present I can be at that booth. And I think that translates to keeping my customers happy as well.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. And how we got talking about this idea of market theory and how you're selling your stuff is because last Saturday was your first market. So I know right now that production is small, but you're doing some. You did your first market, you're selling some to restaurants. Where would you say you are now in terms of weekly revenue on the farm, in terms of how much maybe average revenue is when everything gets going? Are you 25% of where you'll be eventually? Are you 50% of where you'll be eventually?
I'm about 25% of where I'll be in the summer. I'm a little down this year from where I was this same time last year, mainly because I took so much time off the farm this winter.
You know, related to that whole idea, and this may be a topic for a whole other show, but when you were just starting out, how did you survive the winter in this part of the season where you obviously have living expenses, there's some farm expenses, but revenue is either non-existent in the winter months and just starting to come in very slowly at times like now? Is it just budget ahead, save ahead, those types of things?
Back then, I wasn't really as keen on tracking my expenses and all that stuff. Basically, I was I would have considered myself a professional at living below the poverty line. Basically, when I was a musician living in Montreal, I was an expert at living on less than $20,000 a year. So it wasn't really anything that I hadn't been used to before. I mean, my first season, I came out of it with about 22,000 as gross. When I finished the season, I might have had $10,000 there. And I still had some money that I'd saved before I got into farming, because I didn't actually spend all the money that I had budgeted to spend in my first year. I spent considerably less. So it was okay. Like, I had basically, what would it be? November, December, January, February, March, 5 months not working. I made it work.
In terms of making it work, when you look at your farm expenses for a year, are they highest now, given that you're buying things like seed and compost and some other inputs that you'll only use at the very beginning of the season, or you're buying it now and it'll last throughout the season? And then does the expenses go down as the season progresses?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's pretty standard for any farmers. Right now, all I'm doing is spending money. Like, when I look at the revenues that the farm is making right now, they're pretty much all going to my employee. Like, I'm lucky to make $200 a week from my farm right now. But that's okay, because I mean, I've set myself up for that, like that's part of it. In previous years, it wouldn't have been so extreme, because I would have had more of the winter to get things going. But yeah, I mean, that's typical for any farm, that at the beginning, you're pretty much just spending money for the first 2 months, if not a bit more. And this is why a lot of small scale farmers are so attracted to the CSA model, because that really takes care of a lot of that problem. But the problem with the CSA model that I find economically is that you spend all that money up front, and then mid-season you're doing all this work and you're not really getting paid for it. I mean, you got paid for it at first, but it gets a little depressing when you just see your cash flow just kind of drop off the face of the planet in the summer. And that's the opposite for me, is in the summer, or, from May until mid-September, my farm is doing very, very high sales. And it's nice to be able to, look at that weekly income and going, oh wow, it did really well this week, and, kind of set better targets for the next weeks, and kind of look at those averages.
Along those lines, do you ever see any farmers get into danger zones because of that CSA model? They've taken all the money up front. They think, wow, look what I have. And then they don't take into account that they're not taking another check for a long time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen dozens of farmers do that, or at least ones that I've consulted for, or ones that I've met at workshops and stuff over the years, for sure. I won't say that it's common, but I've definitely heard it before. That's why it's so important to budget and do all that. I mean, that's kind of the idea of a CSA, is if you are going to run one, you better budget. You better really look at those numbers, because you don't want to blow the entire wad right at the beginning. I mean, then what have you got? Then you're just left on your farmers markets, or, perhaps if you're more diversified, then it's not as big of a deal. But yeah, if you're like strictly a CSA farmer with maybe one farmer's market a week, yeah, you really got to budget carefully.
In terms of budgeting and starting up the season, I think it's these transition periods where people say, okay, I'm going to try new stuff. You're trying some new stuff this year. When it comes time to try tools and different things for the farm, is there stuff that you think is just a complete waste of money, or you see farmers spend money on and you're like, why are you doing this? That is not money you should be spending?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I see people, constantly is just, it's the number one thing in this space. We're speaking to probably a crowd that is listened to your show through Permaculture Voices and whatnot. The biggest thing I see people kill themselves on is ideology. And this is what killed me. And because I came into this with complete ideological reasons, of wanting to solve all the major problems of the world. I heard Jeff Lawton say 5 years ago, you can solve all the world's problems in a garden. I took that literally, which I don't believe that that's true any longer. But I see many farmers that come in from permaculture destroy themselves physically and mentally and even spiritually because their ideology is too outlandish, and they will not compromise it at any means. And then they end up doing all this unnecessary work that is just crazy, because if you believe in sustainability, you are a product of the environment as well, and you have to have sustainability for your own self. And so that's where I see people really burn themselves out, and it's for all kinds of different reasons. People think that a kitten dies every time you rototill the soil, or they think, whatever it is, they hear certain things from a lot of this nonsense that gets blasted around on social media, where it's just a lot of sensationalization, and we take a lot of things out of context and kind of draw these lines in the sand with things without really thinking about, okay, what's the best application for the place and the situation. And that's often one thing that people don't often look at. It's like, you got to look at the context. You got to look at, is that the right tool for this job? And is it the right thing for the place that you're in or the time? That's the biggest thing I see people burn themselves out on.
That's a good point, because it seems like in both the workshops I've sat through with you, somebody asked, do you double dig your beds? And it's like, no. Do you realize the amount of double digging that would be required, the amount of time that would be required for the gain that you're getting, when you could just till that bed one time and a fraction amount of the time use drops worth of gasoline in the process? And it's just one of those things. I know you're going to no-till now, and one of those other things you're doing to try and mitigate using technology for your benefit and mitigate work that you don't have to do is you're trying out using a biofilm plastic this year. What's the idea behind that?
It's a pretty cool product, actually. It's a totally certified organic product, and it is a biofilm that's made from non-GMO corn resin that is basically just like a plastic mulch. You see this stuff in California, in big ag, huge strawberry fields of plastic mulch. It's the same idea. Basically, I use it. I'm only using it in what I refer to in my book and my workshops and my course as a bi-rotation area. So this is the areas of my farm, like the certain plots of my farm that grow the longest season type of crops that I grow. So in this one particular plot that I'm using this stuff, it's where I grow beets, kale, and chard this year. And then after that, those crops out of the ground, there'll be one more crop that precedes them or proceeds them. And so basically what I'm doing is rototilling the bed and rototilling into the walkways as well. So the walkways are soft. And then I basically, this biofilm is about 3 feet wide. And actually it's 4 feet wide. And so what I do then, I take a shovel. It takes a little bit of time to set up. I'm kind of trying to figure out the right way to do it things are always a little bit more complicated when you're on a small farm in tight spaces and you've only got, 8-inch walkways. You can't just get a machine that can lay this plastic down, which is in what most situations happens on farms, or even some intensive farms. There's a BCS plastic layer, but even on my size of my farm, that wouldn't work. So, I'm basically digging, forming this bed with a tiller, putting on my compost on the bed, and then laying my drip irrigation underneath it, and then rolling this biofilm stuff over top of it, tucking it into the sides that I've dug out, and then digging the dirt back over so that it's kind of buried into the ground. And so each bed, perfectly 30 inches wide, is just a sheet of this plastic looking stuff that I will punch hole. I have a tool called a seed bed roller. It has these little dibbles that pop into it, and I can put them in the perfect spacing that I want for my transplants. And then I roll this thing over the bed, and it punches all the holes in perfect spacing for where I put those transplants in. So tomorrow we're going in there and popping in all these little beet transplants in there. And so the idea with it is that, one, it reduces drastically the amount of water that I need to use. Though that's not my main concern. My main concern of this stuff is suppressing weeds. That's the main thing for me. But it will also be using far less water because there's no evaporation, basically. Well, there's very little evaporation. And so I can probably use half the amount of water. Even though for myself in British Columbia, water isn't so much of an issue for us here yet, like it is down in California. But, I try to take all the measures I can to be as conservative with water use as possible. So that's kind of where this is coming from. Basically, in my bi-rotation plots, because they're the furthest plots in my network and they grow the longest season crops, I only go to these types of plots once a week to basically harvest. So I want to set them up so there's no work to do at that plot whatsoever except plant the stuff, set it. It's all on timed irrigation. Then all I do is show up and harvest, and that's it. I don't have to worry about pulling weeds. I don't have to worry about grass creeping in on the edges of the plot. It's all covered. So all I have to do is harvest. And to me, it's worth a little bit more upfront work to make that perfect so that I don't have to worry about that once the summer comes on and it's hot and weeds are germinating every, couple days. I don't want to have to think about a plot like that because I'm not turning those beds over that often. So I don't want to have other reasons to go to that plot besides the harvest.
Is this the same as the landscape fabric that you're planting the kale into, or is this different?
Different. This stuff's different because the landscape fabric I'm using, I can reuse. And I find if like beets, for example, I'm planting at 4 rows with 3-inch spacing. So there's a lot of holes. And the landscape fabric doesn't work as well for that because the hole, I got to make a hole at least 2 inches big, and so there'd just be too many holes, and it just doesn't really make sense for that application. So for crops that have a ton of transplants, I'm using the biofilm. It's pretty much just for beets, actually. The kale, I've got the landscape fabric, which I'll reuse. I use the landscape fabric for my head lettuce, my Salanova lettuce. It's pretty much just beets that I'm using this stuff so far for.
Yeah, and then at the end of the season, just pull it up.
Yeah, just pull it up, and they literally tell you that you can just rototill it right into the ground, and it will just disintegrate and just compost. I have a number of certified organic farmer friends that have been using it for the last year, and they really like it. They're really happy with it. I don't really like the idea of rototilling it back in, and I don't like to rototill in the fall anyway, so that's not something that I would do. But it's good to know that it's just going to break down and not going to be landfill that's going to be ingested by birds or whatever else.
It's a cool little way to use technology there to save yourself a lot of work, and I'm sure it's easier to put that down with somebody else helping you than just do it yourself. And you're out there now training a new employee. How does having somebody else on the farm change how you approach the farm itself this year?
It's pretty cool. I mean, I've had employees in the past, so it's nothing new as far as that goes. It's nice to have um, somebody who can hold down tasks that, need to get done that are time consuming while I can go do other things. And so, right now I'm doing a lot of errands. Like I have to run and get supplies and, oh, we need another tool. We need a couple more of these irrigation pieces, or, oh, we need more landscape fabric. Oh, I got to go get another load of compost. So it's nice that when I'm doing those things, there's somebody doing some specific task. Like today, my guy Mark was out, transplanting head lettuce. And so, I'm running in and out and doing 100 things at once while he's getting some specific jobs done, which is great. And so I think, you at some point you're going to have people working with you, unless, you've got a partner or it's a family operation or something like that. At some point, most farmers are going to have help. It's pretty easy to burn out if you don't have help, because things can get pretty overwhelming on a farm, especially when, extremes happen, when you get extreme weather events, or it's super hot in the summer, or you've got so much demand, you're just struggling to catch up, or whatever it could be, the unexpected happens. It's pretty good to have help. So it's crucial. I mean, I'm still finishing the last touches of my book too. So, I'm spending 2.5 hours inside in the morning and a few more hours in the evening writing and stuff. So it's nice to have somebody helping to get things done quicker.
So already in this series of episodes, we've talked about how you're maximizing production on the land, and you're not farming more land this year than last year, but you've now brought on an employee. So how do you justify the costs versus the revenue? Are you really making much more on the farm this year by having that employee, or are you still making the same amount and you're just going to take less?
Basically, I'm going to take less, which I'm okay with at this point, because I have other revenue streams. The plan here is, the way I look at him, I don't look at employees as an overhead. I look at them as an investment. And so my strategy here is to invest in a person, and this is the risk that you take as an employer, which can be stressful. It's like, if I train a person for 4 months and then invest in them and then they leave, well, then I've lost on my investment, right? So it's always a risk. I'm aware of that, but I look at it as an investment. So I want to train a person who can take over some major responsibilities on the farm, so that instead of myself as the business owner getting trapped in this endless cycle of working in my business, I can have somebody else working in the business, and I can step back and work on the business and work on expanding the farm, because I do have a 5-year plan where I'm trying to turn my farm into a sort of a center for innovation in urban agriculture, and be an education center as well, and bring people here internationally to run a program. I'm working towards that, but I can't really work on the business until I free myself up from being stuck on working in the business. So that's the main idea with having somebody helping, at least from where I am right now, is that I need to be able to free myself up to work on it.
So he's helping you do a lot of different things into the future with your business. It's freeing up some time so you can evolve it. But he's also helping you now on the farm with current things. And that's what we'll be talking about next week. We'll get into different things that you're doing with your irrigation system, talk about how you're handling your nursery, and maybe touch on some of the crops that you're moving into this year that you hadn't done in the past, things like Salanova. So look forward to talking to you again next week and see what's going on the farm.
Great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Urban Farmer, Week 4. For links, photos, and more information about The Urban Farmer, visit permaculturevoices.com/TUF4. Here's a preview of next week's show, where we talk about trying out new crops, just like this one. It's called Salanova, and it's a relatively new type of head lettuce that's higher yielding and less labor demanding.
Just cut it and leave it right in the field, and then it grows back. You get 3 cuts from it. It's exactly the same approach as doing loose leaf lettuce, except that I can't use my quick greens harvester. I have to harvest it by hand. But from what JM tells me, and actually a few other people I know in Quebec that do the same thing, the yield is 40% higher per square foot.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.